Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about the strongest frontline in the game in set 6 for the next patch 12.1. So this is a guide for building a strong frontline in the late game and what type of frontlines you want to have building up to that stage. Let's get started. My name is Sma. I've been a challenger for the last 3 seasons and I peaked over rank 5 and over 1500 LP, sometimes maining Zed and sometimes being a flex player, but check the credentials and let's go to the next slide. Today in the agenda, this is what we're going to be talking about. Number 1, we're going to be talking about the best late game front lines, and 2, a chart of pros and cons for all 3 front lines. So there are 3 main front lines in the late game at the top tier: Colossus, Vanguards, and Brawlers. We'll take a look at each of them separately and compare them within each other. So Colossus, the innate ability of Colossus is that each Colossi are bigger and more powerful and immune to crowd control effects. However, each Colossus requires 2 team slots. So 2 Colossus trait champions take 25 less damage only for the Colossus. And here I put a little board on what a little Colossus board would look like. It looks like you take a lot of units out of the board, but here let me explain why Colossus are currently the best frontline in the game. So the idea behind the frontline: Galio, a 5 cost, very hard to get but very rewarding. Galio's ult is a half a board knockup with a stun duration reflective on its health totals. Make note of that. So if you stack more health on them, or they'll do a longer time of knockup duration based on the health percentages. Blitzcrank may not be the tankiest Vanguard or the highest cost unit, but his tankiness is not shown through himself, rather showed through the Colossus, as he provides both protector for his Scion and a little bit of bodyguard value for Galio. Also, he provides a lot of utility while pulling out these corner units, which a lot of players do not usually expect or are forced to put their units in because of Socialite Spot. Last but not least, the bulkiest of the big boys, Scion. Since the buff, Scion 2 will knock up units like half their enemy boards for over 3 seconds, and with the addition of smarter AI, the CC is usually perfect when your opponent is not ready to declump their carries. So that is the first front line I wanted to talk about. Later on we'll compare it with other ones, but the second ones I want to talk about are Brawlers. So a lot of people don't like using Brawlers in the late game because all they provide is a lot of HP statistics, which is perfect in the early game because not a lot of people will build their biggest counter, Giant Slayer, but I'll talk about it a little bit more in the future. Let me just talk about the main units that they have, starting with Mundo, the premier tank, Zac, a good utility, Trundle Vi, the mid-game converters, and Tom Kench, the little high roll that you can use to convert your low cap board to a very high cap board. So Brawlers are very essential to the early game, but sometimes when you get to the late game and you lost a lot of HP, you were required to roll a lot, you won't have a lot of money to switch out of Brawlers to a good Vanguard frontline. So that's why sometimes you have to stick with the Brawlers, and let me give you some pros and cons of that. So on the top and bottom, I provided 2 different comps in which I would usually be comfortable playing Brawlers frontline. Bruisers frontline. The Bruisers at the top is the most common. It's the Urgot twin shot with the Bruisers. This is the most popular because of the Chemtech trait. It's really easy to use Chemtech with the Bruisers, as Mundo and Zac are usually the premier tanks, and Urgot really benefits from Chemtech. So this is usually the premier Bruiser comp, but you should not be afraid to use it with any other backline damage like Jhin, Orianna, even worst case to worst, challengers can even use Bruisers frontline. The thing about Bruisers is that they have a lower cap than Vanguards, and in the late game they'll usually be shred earlier because when the late game comes around, a lot of Giant Slayers are being made because, you know, big Colossus units, Warmogs, and the thing about Bruisers, it doesn't only give HP to the Bruiser units, rather it gives HP to the whole comp itself. So when using Bruisers or Brawlers, you usually like playing them in the early game because raw stats is really important in the early game, as a lot of champions / units can't get through them early enough. So because of this, you often get a lot of augments that are representative against your boards. Like explained in my last video, a lot of augments will be represented off your board. So that means you'll have to pick up, you know, Chemtech augments or Bruiser augments, which will cost you to have a little problems in the future with your board. But honestly, it doesn't become that much of a problem in the future, because if you adapt to one of these Bruiser frontlines, you won't have to have a dead augment, right? For example, in the bottom one, if you pick up a Chemtech augment, you can just run Mundo and Zac and still have the Chemtech buff for those two frontline units. If you have a Bruiser, you have 4 Bruiser. On the top one, if you have Bruiser, you have 6 Bruiser. And that's just really some easy win cons in which you guys can cash out that really easy top 4. Yeah, looking out for those Chemtech traits and Brawlers traits really excels this frontline to the very much. But again, it has its cons and it wins. So look forward to using the Brawlers, and later on I'll explain how you can beat it and what are its main concerns. So moving on very quickly, we got the Bodyguards. I know in the first few slides I called them Vanguards, but that's just an old habit. So the Bodyguards are one of the toughest front lines to peel, but you need to have specific counters if you want to peel through them. So you see in a lot of early games, a lot of people like taking Bodyguard augments because it's just such a cuck item, right? In the early game, if you don't have a Last Whisper, you know, you decide you want to have that greedy Hurricane, you won't be able to cut through 4 Bodyguards. And especially with that early amount of shield, you will definitely get the 4-0 treatment and you won't feel good about it. So let me explain a little bit more about the Bodyguards. So the Bodyguards, for me personally, I do not like going over 2 unless I have an augment, which I will be more comfortable fitting in 3 to 4 Bodyguards at a time. For example, in this photo I put here, I put Braum, Leona, Blitzcrank, and no other Bodyguards because the fact is I don't like running Darius and Poppy in my game, and Galio is often very hard to fit in, especially if you're not playing the Colossus frontline. And if you have Galio already, why not just play the Colossus frontline, because that's just strictly a better frontline. So looking at my positioning a little here, Braum is usually you want as your center focus, while Leona will provide a shield. And a little known fact is her splash shield will provide armor and magic resist for all the units affected it. So if you are playing that Yone comp or just have any frontliners, make sure that it's staying close to each other. Unless you have exiles or something like that, then don't. You know, that's not a good idea. But yeah, the idea around these Bodyguards are they provide a lot of shielding and armor, but they do have a lot of counters to it, which include burn damage, Last Whisper, and AP damage, respectfully. So let's go see the chart that I made. Colossus Pros provides a lot of CC, immune to CC, and good in both AP and AD damage. So the idea is that they have a lot of CC to provide, you know, the Scion 3-second stun into a Galio percents big stun into, like, you know, immune to CC, where they're not allowed to get enforced and they're not allowed to get, you know, stunned, are both really good pros. And the fact of the matter is they both take 25% less damage. So big burst comps like Victor or Lux, they won't be able to cut through the Colossus very easily. But the con of Colossus is you often lose 2 units of spots per Colossus, and it's very easy Giant Slayer value. So you got to watch out for that. But One more con that you have to look out for is that Galio often flies away after his first cast. So make sure you want to put your main carry behind Scion, because Scion will often be that sturdy rock for you casting, and especially if you have that Blitzcrank, which will provide a % health shield to your Scion, will be really good for your Scion. So make sure you don't have Galio in front of your main carry and Scion in front of your main one. Moving on, we have Bruisers or Brawlers. Sorry for the misprints, but Bruisers have a lot of raw AP stats, and if you get to the 6 or 4 Bruisers as soon as possible, I will guarantee that you'll have a lot of streaks in your early game. And another pro is that they have a lot of similar traits with each other. So they often have Chemtech, Enforcer, Scrap. They're all mixed in, and they have a lot of similar traits, in which making your early game and mid game very sustainable and very easy. Another pro is that it has a lot of healing, right? Although that they naturally don't have any healing, Chemtech is a lot of healing, Mundo is a lot of healing, Bai has that like armor cut. So you just need to read more into these Bruisers and see that each of them have their own unique ability, and use that to place them across the map. I could do a video later on about all these small tricks and stuff, but that's just the surface of Brawlers. But yeah, there's an item. The con of Brawlers are there's an item to counter this entire trait, which is called Giant Slayer. So if someone decides to build Giant Slayer, try and stay away from the Bruisers late game, because you will melt very easily. And Bruisers not really good into AD because of the fact that they do have that accessibility to Giant Slayer, much easier than AP does. So look out for that. Also, Bodyguards pros are they often fuck assassin players very easily, because they have that innate taunt at the beginning of the round that they taunt everything around it. Not only do they have the taunt, they also have an innate shield just based on how many Bodyguards you have. So I think it's 100, 200, 400. That's really a free shield that the game is giving to you. And basically, you know how it goes. A lot of armor, really good into AD. About the con, let me move the camera for a second. The con is that they're really bad into AP and burn damage, and realistically, they have some pretty shit units that you can't run in the late game, so look out for that. Yeah, thank you everyone for watching the video. I hope to produce more quality content for everyone, so let me know how you feel about the video, and thank you for watching. See you next time.